All right, let's dive in. Today, we're taking a deep look at the tumultuous first half of 2025 in the United States. We've pulled insights from a whole range of sources, really everything from detailed economic surveys to, chronicles of major events. Our goal is basically to give you a true shortcut to being well-informed, pinpointing the major shifts, and frankly surprising facts that really define these past few months, focusing on what's most important for you to understand without feeling, well, completely overwhelmed by it all.
Yeah, and what's truly striking, I think, is how these diverse sources really come together. They paint such a vivid picture. It's a year marked by, I mean, dramatic political transitions, profound economic shifts, and these rapidly evolving societal debates. So we're going to connect the dots on how these events ripple through the national landscape, giving you a comprehensive but still, concise overview.
Okay, so kicking off 2025, the political landscape.
Huh?
Wow, it underwent some seismic shifts right at the federal level. January 20th, that marked a really significant change in leadership. Donald Trump succeeded Joe Biden as president, and J.D. Vance stepped in as vice president after Kamala Harris.
In Congress, too, you saw a major movement there. The 119th Congress finished up, ushering in the 119th.
Yeah, and Senator John Thune took over from Chuck Schumer as Senate Majority Leader. Mike Johnson, though, was reelected as Speaker of the House.
And if we connect this to the bigger picture, these early January changes, they weren't just, ceremonial. They immediately set the stage for a whole series of new policies and, honestly, a dramatic shift in direction across the entire federal government.
Right.
I mean, think about the impact on everything from national security to, say, public health initiatives. We saw those key appointments, like Pete Hegseth confirmed as U.S. Secretary of Defense.
That's the tie-breaking vote from Vance. Yeah.
Exactly.
Uh-huh.
Robert F. Kennedy Jr. became HHS Secretary. Pam Bondi confirmed as Attorney General. Even National Security Advisor Mike Waltz transitioned to become ambassador to the UN later in the spring. These weren't just names changing. They really signaled a clear pivot in priorities and approach.
And beyond that sort of political chessboard, the first half of 2025 was just packed with major events, incidents, touching every corner of American life, really. The year began with a jolt, didn't it? New Year's Day, that tragic vehicle ramming attack on Bourbon Street in New Orleans.
Terrible.
And that, unusual Tesla Cybertruck incident in Las Vegas, both resulting in fatalities, injuries. It immediately brought urban safety and, I guess, emerging tech risks right into focus.
Indeed. And January was also a really busy month on the international relations front. We saw Honduran President Xiomara Castro issue that warning to the U.S. about military bases.
A direct response to Trump's deportation threats, yeah.
Exactly. And outgoing President Biden, he made that significant move, blocking Nippon Steel's acquisition of U.S. Steel. And then later in the month, that sort of standoff over migrant deportations unfolded.
No.
Mexico, Colombia, initially resisting.
But then they reversed course.
Yeah, after the incoming Trump administration threatened tariffs.
Yeah.
It really highlighted the immediate diplomatic challenges, the shifts in U.S. foreign policy right from the start.
And it wasn't just geopolitics, was it? Public health discussions. Surgeon General Vivek Murthy calling for cancer warnings on alcohol.
Right.
And the FDA banned red number 3 food coloring. That got a lot of attention, didn't it? Part of that broader Make America Healthy Again movement.
Yeah, a focus that seemed to find traction under both the Biden administration and now Trump's HHS Secretary, Robert F. Kennedy Jr.
January also brought a really challenging series of natural disasters. Southern California, especially greater Los Angeles, devastating wildfires. The Palisades fire, they called it the most destructive in LA's history, destroyed thousands of structures, forced huge evacuations. And the Eaton fire, too, extensive burning, numerous fatalities. And then, in a kind of stark reminder of infrastructure vulnerability, Richmond, Virginia. The water issue. Yeah, a complete loss of running water for the entire city, surrounding counties, all because of a water treatment facility malfunction during that harsh weather. It really underscored the growing pressures, didn't it? On infrastructure, on emergency response. Absolutely. And then on the tech and business front in January, Meta announced that big shift, removing fact checkers.
Right, for Facebook, Instagram, Threads, moving to a community system.
And SpaceX had a successful launch, the UAE satellite. And that whole TikTok saga seemed to culminate with the Supreme Court upholding those provisions, the ban unless sold by ByteDance.
Which led TikTok to temporarily go offline in the U.S.,
Yeah.
But what really stood out, I think, was the announcement of the Stargate project, that massive joint venture.
Oracle, MGX, SoftBank, OpenAI.
Yeah, focused on developing AI infrastructure here in the U.S. We're talking a projected $500 billion investment
Half a trillion. Wow.
in creating 100,000 new jobs by 2029. It signals a huge national push in AI. Oh, and on a more quirky note, Spirit Airlines banned passengers wearing lewd clothing or having offensive tattoos.
I remember that one. So following the inauguration, the Trump administration moved fast, implementing a whole range of executive actions. His second inauguration, it was indoors, wasn't it? First time since Reagan.
Yeah, due to the cold temperatures. And policy-wise, he issued several high-profile pardons. Ross Ulbricht of Silk Road.
And the January 6th defendants, roughly 1,500 of them.
Right. And the administration froze activities of the National Institutes of Health, the NIH. That impacted billions in research. Globally, he redesignated the Yemeni Houthi movement as a foreign terrorist organization, ordered a plan for releasing those JFK and MLK assassination files.
That got a lot of attention.
It did. And a judge temporarily blocked his order restricting birthright citizenship. Symbolically, he banned non-U.S. flags at embassies. And then the bigger steps, ordering the U.S. withdrawal from the Paris Climate Agreement again.
And the World Health Organization.
Exactly. He also reversed Biden's removal of Cuba from the state sponsors of terrorism list. And the Treasury Department imposed sanctions on a Chinese cybersecurity company. It really was a rapid and broad reorientation of federal priorities almost immediately.
Moving into February, we again saw natural disasters hitting the eastern U.S., that big storm complex, flooding, fatalities.
Yeah, another tough weather event. But the business world brought some stark contrasts, didn't it? Southwest Airlines announced its first mass layoff since 1971.
1,750 jobs cut. And Joann Stores filed for bankruptcy again, closing all stores.
Pretty bleak news there. Yet, on a more, maybe optimistic note for American manufacturing, Eli Lilly announced that huge $27 billion investment in new drug manufacturing plants here.
That's a big number.
It is. Politically and societally, in February, you had the 5501 demonstrations popping up.
Protests at state capitals, D.C., targeting the administration, Department of Government Efficiency, Elon Musk, Project 2025.
Yeah, a sign of the pushback. And a U.S. district judge temporarily blocked Trump's executive order to suspend the refugee admissions program, highlighted those immediate legal challenges to his immigration plans.
And the trade rhetoric continued.
Oh, yes. Trump talked tariffs on Canada, Mexico, China, initially delayed them after talks, but then later reimposed them. He also sanctioned the International Criminal Court. And in a notable international development, Russia released a U.S. prisoner after direct talks with a Trump envoy.
Interesting.
Domestically, there were those reports of Trump officials firing nuclear staff. And significantly, the U.S. joined Russia in voting against a UN resolution condemning Russia's war against Ukraine. So that period really highlighted ongoing legal battles, shifts in international alliances, and those direct impacts on federal agencies.
March continued that challenging trend of natural disasters, wildfires in the Carolinas.
And that severe storm in North Texas, yeah. Wildfires also spread fast across Texas and Oklahoma. And Alaska had that tragic avalanche in the Chugach Mountains.
On the tech and business side, OpenAI unveiled GPT 4.5, pushing AI further.
Right. And Microsoft announced retiring Skype in favor of Teams, a shift in how businesses communicate. But investments really dominated the headlines again in March. TSMC, the Taiwanese chip giant, announced a massive $100 billion investment in U.S. manufacturing.
$100 billion. Huge.
And the French shipping giant CMA CGM pledged $20 billion. Then, in a sort of novel move, Trump signed an executive order establishing a U.S. strategic Bitcoin reserve.
A Bitcoin reserve. Interesting.
Yeah. And Tesla had the significant recall of nearly all its Cybertruck models over a safety issue. But the manufacturing investment boom seemed to continue. Johnson & Johnson planning $55 billion in U.S. investments.
And Hyundai announced $20 billion.
A lot of capital flowing in, or at least being pledged. March also saw some pretty profound shifts in domestic policy and societal debates. Trump signed an executive order designating English as the official language of the U.S.
Controversial.
Very. The CIA director announced the U.S. suspended intelligence sharing with Ukraine. A significant pivot. The U.S. also began direct negotiations with Hamas over Israeli hostages, with Trump issuing that stark warning. Domestically, the Department of Veterans Affairs announced layoffs of over 80,000 jobs.
Wow, 80,000 to comply with the Department of Government Efficiency plans.
That was the stated reason, yes. Trump also signed an executive order to begin the process of eliminating the Department of Education. And the U.S. suspended financial contributions to the World Trade Organization. More signals of a shift inward.
And Idaho made headlines too, didn't it?
It did. Governor Brad Little signed those bills, making firing squad the primary execution method and permitting the death penalty for child rape. both potentially challenging Supreme Court precedent. Culturally, Trump signed an executive order shutting down multiple state-funded broadcasters, like Voice of America.
And ceasing grants to Radio Free Europe Radio Liberty.
Right. Utah became the first state to ban LGBTQ pride flags in government buildings and schools, reflecting those ongoing culture wars. And in a powerful act of protest, Senator Cory Booker made history with that 25-hour Senate floor speech against the Trump agenda.
Quite a month. Then April brought major economic news. That lawsuit from RealPage against Berkeley over rent algorithms.
Yeah, testing the limits of tech regulation at the local level. But the market saw significant turbulence. Stocks fell sharply. The Dow plummeted over 2,200 points.
And the S&P 500 down 9.1% that week. Worst since March 2020.
Exactly. Federal Reserve Chairman Jerome Powell responded, warning of a highly uncertain outlook. Yet despite that volatility, several major companies seemed to double down on U.S. investment. Novartis planned $23 billion.
NVIDIA announcing AI supercomputers in Texas, part of that huge $500 billion U.S. push.
Roche announced $50 billion. IBM announced a staggering $150 billion in U.S. manufacturing and research. But on the regulatory front, you saw pushback. Harvard sued the Trump administration over grant freezes and stopping international student enrollment.
And California sued over the tariffs, deepening those federal-state conflicts.
Definitely. In terms of politics and society, in April, you had the hands-off protests across the U.S.
Opposing Trump and Elon Musk.
Right. Trump officials continued freezing funding for universities, hitting Cornell and Northwestern. Plans were announced to cut funding for public broadcasting like NPR and PBS. Meanwhile, former Congressman George Santos was sentenced. More than 7 years in federal prison.
Right. And on the international stage, the U.S. and Ukraine signed that mineral resources agreement.
Yeah, providing a clear economic incentive for U.S. investment in Ukraine's defense and reconstruction in exchange for access to resources. We also saw some really shocking incidents. That sightseeing helicopter crash in the Hudson.
Killing all 6 on board? Tragic.
And a man arrested after allegedly breaking into Pennsylvania, Governor Josh Shapiro's residence and starting a fire.
Just a relentless pace. May was equally dynamic. Significant actions in Congress, the courts, the House voting to block California's gas vehicle phase-out law using the Congressional Review Act.
A significant use of that tool. Trump issued another executive order, this time telling the Corporation for Public Broadcasting to cease funding NPR and PBS. The ACLU filed that major lawsuit against the Bureau of Prisons over conditions in Alaska.
And then, a truly historic moment globally. American Robert Francis Prevost elected Pope.
Pope Leo XIV, first North American Pope. Quite something. Domestically, Newark Mayor Ross Baraka was taken into custody, protesting outside an ICE detention center. We saw the first group of white South Africans arrive after Trump granted them refugee status.
Which led the Episcopal Church to end its partnership with the government on resettlement.
A controversial move on multiple fronts. Trump signed a bill making revenge porn a federal crime. And in that rare show of bipartisan unity, the Senate unexpectedly passed the No Tax on Tips Act.
Unanimously, wasn't it?
It was. A federal judge blocked immigration authorities from revoking international students' legal status. Elon Musk publicly acknowledged leaving the White House, cryptically mentioning the DOJ initiative would continue.
Always interesting with Musk.
Indeed. The White House faced a lawsuit over lack of sign language interpreters. And the Supreme Court allowed the Trump administration to end the TPS program for Venezuelans, revoking status for 500,000 migrants.
Huge impact there. What about business and economy in May?
Massive deals and investments continued. Boeing and GE Aerospace secured that $96 billion deal with Qatar Airways. The UAE announced ambitious plans, $1.4 trillion investment in the U.S. over 10 years.
$1.4 trillion.
Yeah. And 2 of America's largest cable companies announced a merger, hinting at consolidation. Unfortunately, the month also saw several notable incidents, that Mexican Navy ship hitting the Brooklyn Bridge.
Tragic. And the explosion at the fertility clinic in Palm Springs.
Linked to a suspect with nihilistic ideations, they said. And President Joe Biden diagnosed with aggressive prostate cancer. The month ended with that concerning shooting of 2 Israeli embassy staffers outside D.C.'s Capitol Jewish Museum.
Security concerns rising there. Moving into June, the political and societal landscape kept shifting rapidly. Trump signed that order banning citizens of 12 countries from entering the U.S.
A significant immigration restriction. We also saw that complex case of Kilmar Abrigo Garcia, the Maryland father wrongfully deported, then returning to face trafficking charges.
And tensions around immigration enforcement escalated in L.A.
Yeah, Trump activated the National Guard in response to protests against ICE actions. California's AG sued, but a court allowed Trump to keep control. The U.S. Army's 250th anniversary parade coincided with Trump's birthday, sparking those No Kings protests across various cities.
Right. On a different note, a judge blocked Trump's ban on gender-neutral passports.
But the administration announced shutting down the LGBTQ youth suicide hotline. The Supreme Court upheld Tennessee's ban on gender-affirming care for minors, and a new Texas law required the Ten Commandments in every public school classroom.
Major cultural shifts there.
And environmental policy, too. The administration ended protections for 58 million acres of national forests. The Supreme Court further limited federal judges' power to block Trump orders and sided with parents objecting to certain children's books and upheld Texas's age verification law for porn sites.
And Governor Newsom sued Fox News.
Over alleged defamation, yes. A busy month legally and politically. Economically, in June, we continued seeing big investments alongside challenges. Micron announced that massive $200 billion investment in semiconductors.
Huge boost for U.S. chipmaking.
But furniture retailer At Home filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy, cited tariffs and declining customers. Nippon Steel also finally completed its acquisition of U.S. Steel. That deal had been contentious.
Health news in June.
A salmonella outbreak linked to a California egg distributor sickened dozens. But on a positive note, the FDA approved a powerful new HIV drug, showed really promising results in trials.
Good news there, internationally.
The U.S. entered into conflict with Iran, bombing key nuclear sites. Trump later lashed out at both Israel and Iran over a ceasefire, and the month was sadly marked by a string of tragic incidents. That helicopter training accident at Fort Campbell,
Killing a soldier.
the shooting deaths of 2 Minnesota lawmakers at their homes, devastating flash floods in West Virginia, multiple mass shootings, Salt Lake City, Indianapolis, Philadelphia, a tornado in North Dakota, boating accidents in Lake Tahoe, shootings in Idaho, a plane crash in Ohio.
Just relentless.
It really was. And worryingly, gun suicide rates in the U.S. hit record levels, a growing crisis.
As we wrap the first half and move into July up to the 17th, the headlines just kept coming. Philadelphia's largest city workers' union went on strike.
Right. And the Wisconsin Supreme Court's liberal majority struck down that very old 176-year-old abortion ban, a significant legal development.
More immigration enforcement, too. Mexican boxer Julio Cesar Chavez Jr. arrested for deportation. And the first detainees arrived at that new Florida center in the Everglades.
In a move probably welcomed by many travelers, the TSA announced passengers could keep their shoes on.
Finally. End of an era there.
It is. The IRS stated churches can now endorse political candidates. Trump expressed wanting to eliminate the Chemical Safety Board. Florida executed an inmate, pushing the U.S. to a 10-year high for executions. Politically, 211 House Republicans voted to block releasing the Jeffrey Epstein files.
And the prosecutor in the Diddy and Epstein cases was fired by the Justice Department?
Yes. Trump also rescinded $4 billion in funding for California high-speed rail and signed tougher fentanyl penalty legislation.
July also brought devastating natural disasters, didn't it? Texas Hill Country floods.
Catastrophic. At least 75 dead in one county. That summer camp tragedy, 27 girls and staff killed or missing. Just awful. A tsunami advisory off Alaska after a big earthquake, thankfully canceled.
And on the economic front,
the U.S. opened its first rare earth mine in over 70 years, in Wyoming. A strategic move. Tech and energy giants poured billions into turning Pennsylvania into an AI hub, part of Trump's tech push. Shows how central AI infrastructure is becoming. And a House subcommittee rejected proposed NASA budget cuts, which was interesting.
incidents continued in July, too.
Unfortunately, yes. Explosions at a fireworks warehouse in California, 7 bodies recovered. Mass shootings in Indianapolis and Philadelphia again. A fatal exchange of fire at a Border Patrol facility in Texas. Remarkably, 31 trapped workers rescued from a collapsed tunnel in L.A.
That was amazing.
It was. A shooting in a Kentucky church killed 2 women. A lightning strike at a New Jersey archery range killed 1, injured others. Finally, internationally, Mexico beat the U.S. for the Gold Cup title.
Ouch.
Yeah. The U.S. and Israel signed an MOU on AI and energy cooperation during Netanyahu's visit. And Trump announced new 50% tariffs on copper and imports from Brazil, Iraq, Philippines starting in August. More aggressive trade policy coming.
So after charting that just rapid pace of political and social shifts, it becomes really clear, doesn't it? Many of these actions, especially the new trade policies we just touched on, are already having a profound, measurable impact on the economy. Let's zoom in on that. We've got the latest SIFMA mid-year economic survey published just this month, July 2025, gives us a detailed snapshot. The median economist in the survey forecasts real GDP will grow only 0.9% in 2025.
Only 0.9%.
Yeah, that's a pretty significant decrease, down a full percentage point from the November 2024 survey and zero point 0.6 percentage points from the March flash poll. What's also concerning is that over 70% of the economists surveyed put the probability of a recession between 30 and 50%.
Not insignificant odds.
No. The primary factors they identify impacting U.S. economic growth are U.S. trade policy, U.S. labor market developments, and U.S. monetary policy. And crucially, trade policy also appears right at the top for both upside and downside risks.
And that's the core question, isn't it? Why such a sharp downshift in the economic outlook? The survey directly points to how the administration's new tariff policies could lead to a stagflationary shock. For you, listening, that means a worrying combination. Higher prices and higher unemployment. Not a good mix.
No.
Specifically, those Liberation Day reciprocal tariffs announced back on April 2nd, they were nearly twice as large as expected. This immediately led markets to sharply mark down their estimates for U.S. GDP growth and mark up their estimates for inflation for the rest of this year. Over half the economists surveyed estimate the final weighted average tariff rate will end up somewhere between 14% to 16%.
And the economic ripple effects of these tariffs, they look quite striking in the survey. The average decrease to GDP growth is estimated to range from 10 to 75 basis points. I mean, to put that in perspective, a scenario with a 10% universal tariff and a 145% tariff on China, that could essentially have all GDP growth for the year.
Have it, yeah. And on the inflation side, estimates for the average increase range from 10 to 50 basis points. The worst-case tariff scenario they modeled would push core PCE inflation. That's the Fed's preferred measure, remember, closer to 3.5%. That's double the Federal Reserve's target rate.
Right.
And this creates what economists are calling policy fog. The sheer unpredictability of these tariff policies makes it incredibly difficult for businesses. How do you plan investments? Manage supply chains, price your goods effectively?
You can't, really.
Not easily. Economists are also quick to point out tariffs ultimately act like a tax on imports, which directly raises costs for consumers, and reduces purchasing power. Looking at the inflation forecasts more broadly, core PCE inflation is now forecast to increase to around 3.1% year over year by the end of 2025. That's a significant jump from prior surveys.
Okay, 3.1%.
But there's maybe some slightly better news looking further out. By 2026, these tariff-driven inflation increases are largely expected to be, in the rearview mirror. That should help bring overall core PCE inflation back down towards maybe 2.5%. It's fascinating how trade policy has now become the most important factor in the outlook for core inflation. That's a clear shift from wage growth being the top concern back in December.
Interesting shift.
Yeah. Other factors that could push inflation over 2% sustainably include, the stickiness of wage increases and sustained higher fiscal deficits.
So in terms of monetary policy, where does the Fed stand? The current Fed funds rate is at 4.25% to 4.50%, right, after those cuts last year.
That's right, 100 basis points in cuts during 2024. The median forecast now looks for the midpoint of the target range to end 2025 at 3.926%, which is roughly, 50 basis points in cuts from where we are now?
So fewer cuts expected than maybe before?
Yeah, it seems expectations for further rate cuts have cooled somewhat compared to prior surveys. Reflect this evolving landscape. Interestingly, the 10-year U.S. Treasury rate has declined to around 4.25% at the time of the report.
What does that tell us?
Well, it reflects investor doubts about long-term growth prospects and maybe changing inflation expectations. It seems these new tariffs are creating a kind of timing mismatch. Inflation rises first.
But the growth slowdown comes later.
Exactly. That seems to be the market's read right now.
Okay, let's turn to the labor market. The survey says it's remained surprisingly resilient.
More resilient than expected, yeah, so far. Total non-farm payrolls increased by 147,000 in June, pretty similar to the average monthly gain over the prior year. The unemployment rate even ticked down slightly in June to 4.1%. It's been stuck in a narrow range, really, since May 2024.
But are there warning signs?
Well, if you look closer, yes. Signs of weakening are growing. Private sector payroll growth was only 74,000 in June. That's its weakest performance this year. The labor force itself actually shrank by over 750,000 over the last 2 months.
That's a big drop.
It is. And continuing jobless claims in June hit their highest level since 2021. That indicates more unemployed workers are struggling to find new jobs. The panel median predicts the unemployment rate will rise to 4.4% by year end, and peak around 4.5% in 2026.
And immigration policy plays into this.
Economists are definitely concerned about that. Stepped-up immigration enforcement could shrink the labor force further, slow down hiring. That impacts productivity, growth, especially in sectors already facing worker shortages. We saw the number of foreign-born workers decline to 32.6 million in June. That's 19.1% of the total workforce.
What about wages?
Average hourly earnings grew 3.7% year over year in June, a slight decline from the prior month, which is, good for workers' pockets in the short term.
Yeah.
But higher wages can increase operating costs for employers.
Leading to reduced hiring or maybe higher prices down the line?
Exactly. That's the potential trade-off.
Okay, so how is all this affecting the average person, the consumer?
Well, economists see the U.S. consumer as still spending, but doing so much more selectively now. You're heavily influenced by high interest rates, persistent inflation. It makes sense. There are clear signs of shifting behavior. Reduced spending on durable goods, more caution on discretionary stuff. May retail sales were disappointing, down 0.9%, and real personal consumption expenditures dipped to 2.2% from a year ago.
But what's the overall take on Trump's economic policies from the survey respondents?
A majority, 62.5%, believe the net impact on growth will ultimately be negative. Basically, they think the negative effects of tariffs will outweigh any potential benefits from deregulation and tax cuts.
That brings us to fiscal concerns, debt and deficits. The numbers are pretty stark, aren't they?
They really are. The U.S. total public debt as a percentage of GDP is now slightly over 120%. The federal interest expense on that debt, it's eye-watering. Over $1 trillion per year. $1.1 trillion as of Q1 2025.
Wow. $1 trillion just in interest payments.
Yeah. And the federal deficit is also over 6% of GDP, currently 6.3%. What's striking is these levels are typically seen during recessions, wars, major financial crises, but we're seeing them in what are supposed to be non-stress years.
So concerns about spending are high.
Extremely high among the economists surveyed. The median panel response was 7.5 out of 10 on concern level. When asked about solutions, well, the suggested options to reduce the deficit via spending cuts are Medicare, Social Security, and Medicaid. Politically difficult, obviously.
Very difficult. And for raising revenue?
Individual income taxes, but specifically on high earners, and corporate income taxes were the main suggestions. It really paints a picture of growing fiscal pressure that's going to require some tough choices down the line.
So reflecting on everything we've unpacked today,
Yeah.
wow, it's abundantly clear that 2025 has been a year of just profound adjustments, shifts across the American landscape. It's impacted everything from, your everyday spending habits to global political dynamics, and it feels like it's still very much in motion.
It absolutely is. And this really prompts us to consider what stands out to you, listening, about this snapshot of 2025. The intricate interplay of these forces. You've got the economic uncertainty driven by tariffs, these significant rapid shifts in government policy, and these evolving social values. It strongly suggests a period of, fundamental redefinition for the United States, and many long-term implications are still very much unfolding.
Yeah. So as you look back at this first half of 2025, maybe consider how the push and pull between these immediate economic shifts, the governmental changes, the societal currents, how might that shape the future trajectory? Thinking about individual freedoms, market stability, America's role on the global stage. How are these current events setting the stage for, say, the next decade in the U.S.? Something to think about.